Fully Human Connections. Again, I'm joined with my two co-hosts, Reggie and Kent. How you both doing today, gentlemen?
Doing well, King. It's good to see you. It's great to be here.
And I'm doing well as well. Thank you. Good to see you, both of you.
We're excited about today's show because we have a guest.
Just like that, he jumps in. Look at that.
Hello, Brandon. How you doing?
Terrible. How are you?
Well, I'm doing great. I hate to hear you're doing terrible.
I didn't know we were going to be honest in this, conversation. I thought we were putting on our best fronts. Thank you, Brandon.
I was just watching that Matthew McConaughey video about Uvalde, and I was just like, yeah, terrible. So here we go. And apologies in advance. I'm a little congested, just getting over a cold. But I figure if we're being fully human, that means viruses and phlegm and the whole thing.
Well, it's all welcome, right? It's all part of the experience.
Yeah.
So good to have you, Brandon. Thanks for jumping in this morning.
Yeah, good to be with you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, welcome to the show, Brandon.
Yeah. Nice to meet you too, King, and you too, Reggie.
Yeah, right back at you.
Well, as we begin to, I think that what you talked about, I got a chance to see Matthew McConaughey's presentation, his speech yesterday, the press conference. It was definitely moving, sure. And I like some of the things that he's bringing to the table as far as suggestions on how to bridge the gap. As still being an advocate for the Second Amendment, but at the same time, making sure that there has to be some form of making changes and proposing some changes that I think that we really care about, preventing these type of horrific actions in the future. At a minimum, his changes have to be looked at and explored and possibly acted into law. So I just wanted to add that to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. I had a travel day yesterday. It's in my queue to watch. Yeah. Should we jump in with some gratitude, King? That's how we've been getting these rolling. The last couple of conversations. We like to get present to things that we're most grateful for and build that container for the conversation we want to step into today.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Ken. Yes. Brandon, with you, we'll throw this to you as I guess. We start off with our gratitude moment. We just say things that we're grateful for to really kind of set the context, to really establish their energy and appreciation for the day and for the energy that it may bring us throughout this day as well.
Sounds great. You want me to?
Yeah, you wouldn't mind sharing.
Okay, yeah, okay. I thought that was an invitation. I just wanted
to I put you out there first just to kind of get things started.
We always pick on the new guy.
Yeah.
Cool. The new guy gets the hot seat first, Brandon. Always.
Yeah. So I'm grateful for my wife. She's on a remarkable growth journey and is integrating all sorts of new wisdom. And it's just cool to see her kind of stutter step progress, and just get to witness her newly. Also very grateful for I would call it the ability to say no. I'm doing a lot more of that. It makes it possible to say yes to being with you men today. So yeah, just kind of standing firm in the, I guess the power to say no and to say yes to what's right. Yeah, that's it for the moment. How about you, man?
All right, Reggie, I'll go last with mine.
Okay, I'll jump in. So I'm going to go back to, I mean, I really think of this every day. I'm grateful for indoor plumbing, electricity, food in a refrigerator. And even this morning, when I was working earlier this morning, everything blinked, all the lights and the computer, everything went dark for a split second, then came back on. And all of the things I don't understand about some of the systems I rely on kicked in. So I didn't lose any documents. I didn't lose any data. And my heart gradually slowed down again. And it was, so I'm grateful for that. And then I'm just grateful that we have in this country, we have the ability to, not only in this country, but we have the ability to get together to say out loud what's on our minds. And, we might get in disagreements with people, but we don't get thrown in jail for expressing our opinions. And that's no small thing. As we move through some of the treacheries of 21st century Earth. So I'm really grateful for that as well.
Yeah. I thank both of you. Yeah, I always like to come back to most grateful for the breath and air that I breathe, that we breathe, food, shelter, water. I'm grateful that takeoffs equaled landings yesterday with my flights, so that's always good math. Grateful that we get to, as you were saying, Reggie, that we get to help steward a conversation that matters, and say things and invite things to be said that need to be said and shared. And that is no small deal, as you said. So I'm grateful for our connections here and being able to have these conversations. How about you, King?
Yeah, so thank you for sharing. Thank everyone for sharing. I would say, what I'm grateful for today is my life, my health, ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, have sound mind, roof over my head, a mother that's still alive and still have sound mind and kind heart, and then grateful for the ability, technology today, the ability to have this kind of meeting and be here in Baltimore City, but connected to all of you all from wherever you're all calling in from. I think that's something that's powerful. And then finally, I'm grateful for the infinite possibilities that can come from today's discussion.
Excellent. I forgot to say my kids. I want to love all my kids real quick too. I'm super grateful for my kids.
Absolutely. Well, Ken, I know that Brandon is an author of a book, and I would like to introduce him to our listening audience here on Fully Human Connections, and we can really begin to delve into how this book fits into our theme of building fully human connections.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you so much, King. And as King and you and Reggie know, Brandon, I'm going to have to drop a little early. I'm at a client site and need to do some work, but I wanted to make sure I got here this morning to greet you and invite you and thank you very much for being here and get you connected to King and Reggie.
Yeah.
Brandon and I had it was my absolute pleasure. I'll let him speak to his perspective, but we spoke and met for the first time a couple weeks ago. And I would say it felt as though we've known each other and had been working with one another for quite some time, and we just hadn't had a conversation yet. I really respect Brandon for the work. He's an early pioneer in the conversation and importance around having purpose in one's life. As we were getting connected here and Brandon was speaking to the growth that his wife's going through, I would say I was completely impressed with the growth that Brandon has demonstrated in his life as he shared where he had come from early in his career, the things he thought were important and what was driving him. And then, much like you and I talked about, King, there becomes a shift in consciousness. And And when a shift of consciousness of these kinds of magnitudes happen, one gets reorganized in their life more powerfully. They say no to things that they used to say yes to all the time, and they start saying yes to bigger things, as Brandon's really been an exemplar of. So y'all will have an amazing conversation touching into the work that he's done with Purpose, his company Unity Lab, and helping organizations bring this forward in his most recent book, Purpose Work Nation. And I love, Brandon, how you speak to that. You know, we're all created equals. Let's start with that idea, and like, here we go. Let's revitalize that. So I'm just deeply honored. He's a great speaker, writer, just practitioner, right? So you're in a good tribe here with Reggie and King, and we're just super honored to have you, Brandon. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ken. It's very generous of you. I just want to correct one piece. I'm not
please do.
Yeah, I'm not an early pioneer in Purpose. Like, that's as old as dirt. Like, I'm late to the party. But I'm like, we need to pay attention to this.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Beautiful. Awesome to have you here, man.
Yeah, you got it.
And with what you're writing about, what Reggie's writing about, what King and I care about, you know, having us all connected in skillfully stewarding these conversations of what it means to be fully human, what's going on, what's our sense of purpose individually, what are we up to collectively as a nation, as a people, as a species. You know, so I think we can have a really powerful conversation here.
Yeah.
So welcome.
Thank you.
Absolutely welcome.
Welcome.
Let me start by asking this question, Brandon. You know, in this conscious space that we're all in, you know, word purpose gets thrown out there quite a bit, right? And I know that we have Webster's Dictionary of Purpose that we can look up. But when you talk about purpose in the workplace, I kind of want to hear your perspective and what your thoughts on that as you talk about purpose in that perspective.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, King. Because you're right. It means all sorts of things. There's like purpose soap, purpose beer, purpose. I mean, it's like the buzzword now. Everything is now purpose. Everything. Purpose petroleum, purpose nukes, purpose prisons. You know, like it's almost like lost all of its meaning. But
Right.
you know, as Kent was saying, I'm part of a community of purpose practitioners, and you know, everyone's got a different way that they language it, but it pretty much boils down to kind of one thing, and it's like a transcendent identity, something that's larger than yourself, that aligns, or well, first of all, it reveals who you really are. So it's almost like a, you know, in the kind of Christian context, like a baptism. You're coming into like really who you are, right? It aligns your life around that identity. It guides you, especially through hard decisions. You know, we talked about saying no. And then it's ultimately the only legitimate source of fulfillment, because it's like you being you over and over and over again in all these different ways. Now, that being said, not everyone's ready for that. Like most folks, you know, come into that kind of what might be called a higher purpose or a soul purpose conversation because of crisis. You know, it's like wife leaves you, you get fired, death in the family, and people step back. And historically, that's, you know, maybe 1 to 2% of the population is in that purpose question. Now, the pandemic changed that for a lot of folks. Like, there's a McKinsey study that showed like 2/3 of folks are now like, who the heck am I in the face of a pandemic, climate change, George Floyd's murder? You know, like, should I still be like agitating electrons or pushing widgets? Like, does that even matter? So that kind of big P purpose question is much bigger than it used to be. But there's also like the little P purpose conversation, just like simple acts that express your values, move the vision for the world that you have closer to reality, into the present. So I would say, yeah, transcendent identity, and then little P purpose, and then big P purpose. Like, what is my life about?
Excellent. You know, I don't want to dominate all the questions, but when you're talking, I was thinking to myself, one of the things that I'm grateful for, I left off, but I say this when I go through my actual gratitude moment in the morning, I'm grateful for another 24 hours to pursue my purpose in life. Right? I believe that once I connected to my purpose, life, to your point, had meaning.
Yeah.
Where before it was just kind of just existing, just kind of going through life, hoping good things would happen, praying that bad things did, but now once I connected to my purpose, I wake up with an energy and enthusiasm, but more importantly, with a focus on what I need to get done.
Mm-hmm.
So my next question would be, when we talk about now shifting the mindset of corporate America and saying, okay, now we're going to talk about purpose in the workplace. How do you think that corporations who may not necessarily be of that mindset yet can now say, I need to adopt that as because the world has shifted consciousness now of being more aware of the diversity and everything, from people's sexual identity to race to gender to age or whatever it may be. So how does you think that corporations need to shift into accepting purpose now with that in this kind of dynamic?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. Because there's only been a handful of legitimate transformations like Unilever, Danone, like at a large scale. Every now and again, the owner of a small, medium-sized business will have an awakening and be like, wait a minute, like I am a shepherd of souls. You mean like I can care for these people and their families and the communities, and like it does happen. Like the interface carpet, for example, these things do happen. Patagonia, Eileen Fisher, those aren't as well known as like say Unilever, but so typically there's some awakening in senior leadership. Typically the owner, the head of that of a business unit. Because I've had conversations with everybody else, DEI, L&D, HR, wellness, and they're all on board. They're like the humanists, like the waving the banner of like, let's be fully human at work. Let's have dignity. Let's have jobs that light us up. But their impact, because they have, Reggie, Ken, you know this, and King, you might as well. Like they have little budget and even less power. You just can't get anything done unless like somebody in the senior leadership says, I've got a once in a lifetime chance to do what I was put here to do. And that's activate something unique that only we can do to move humanity forward. So like you can point to what that organization is about, like on Maslow's hierarchy or the UN Sustainable Development Goals. It's like you don't have to go through some mental calculus like, oh well, we make transactions more efficient so that no, it's like no, we're putting shelter in place. We are making the world more sustainable, more just. Like here's how we're doing that. So yeah, an awakening needs to happen. Oftentimes, I get put in rooms with CEOs, and I get to rattle their collars, and this is where I kind of summon that warrior and be like, you're better than this. You're lying. Like, that's not actually what you care about. You don't care about the returns. What do you care about? Like that sort of, I hate to say it because it's a fairly masculine culture, that kind of warrior language. Like, come on, really? 2022, that's what you care about? Really? What are your grandkids going to say about that?
Yeah. I think something I just want to build on something you said earlier and riffing this, and then I'm going to have to leave you all to continue the conversation. COVID, as you were saying, Brandon, has brought forward this question of purpose and what am I actually up to in my life? This is what the Great Resignation is pointing to, right? And toxic culture. Right, the leaders that think those things that used to matter, and people are like, "It's 2022. That stuff doesn't matter as much anymore." Like, look what's happening in the world. And so I think in that way, as Reggie and I started Fully Human at Work in January of 2022, and then COVID happened in March, if you will, we were just like, "Oh, yeah, this is gonna this in a way." Reg, do you remember these conversations? We were like, oh, like I think COVID might actually be a member of our team. and create some malleability in people's psychology that didn't exist before.
Yeah.
Right. So, Red, do you remember that? You remember?
Yeah, I would just say it was actually, and you said 2022, but it was January 2020 when we.
No, but I'm saying now we're 2022. It's like you can't. Yeah.
It was. I mean, I want to go back to Brandon just spoke about that transcendent. You didn't say identity. I forget how I put it exactly. And some of the language that has served me really well since, I guess 1998 or so. It's with Bill Plotkin's language. I was lucky enough to do a vision quest with him in '98, and then about 5 more years of work in his programs. And he speaks about capital S soul as one's unique place in the world. And
ecological niche.
Yeah, he uses so the owl has an ecological niche. The sequoia has an ecological niche. The garter snake has an ecological niche, and we humans have been conditioned out of thinking that perhaps each of us has a unique ecological niche as well. The place that I belong during my life, whether or not I ever know it or realize that there is this place for me to belong. And that's so far removed from, I was born in the 50s and grew up in the 60s and 70s from, get an education, get a good job. Like getting the job, and that makes sense in the cultural givens of the time, and even the cultural givens of now. We do need to have our survival work, and that's not deprecatory. It's the work we do to pay our bills, to get food, have a roof, have that indoor plumbing that I so value. The asterisk next to that is my father was a plumber, but I think I would have enjoyed it even had he been a carpenter or a lawyer. But to begin to, it's so hard, Brandon, to do the work you're doing. There's a quote from a cop in Florida from 30 years ago who was working with kids. Now I'm going to tie this together. It sounds like a non sequitur. When he said, "Why do you work with kids?" He said, "Because I've learned over the course of my career in law enforcement that it's much easier to build a kid than it is to fix an adult." And so, to be pointing the finger at the CEOs who are, whatever age, 30, 40, 50, 60, as opposed to, I almost said the word indoctrinating, throw that one out, but as opposed to exposing our young people to finding, where's the place you belong? What's the thing that you would do even without getting paid? You might have to do some other things to get paid for a while. In fact, you might have to do both for the rest of your life. You might have your survival work and your soul work, or your transcendent identity, or unique ecological niche, whatever we call it. But to at least have a chance of recognizing that when we're younger. I mean, I was in my mid to late 40s when I did that first quest, and it took me another decade to really assimilate what was given to me and begin to see, what my unique ecological niche was, and in Bill's language, and identify my mythopoetic identity, which I just, just for the sake of the language, I love Bill's work.
I know.
But it's, how do we bring that to earlier and earlier human beings, to younger and younger creatures, so we don't have to transform the upper echelons of the corporate world. Period. Okay.
Period.
So,
Well, yes, I think it's a yes and. Bill talks about soul-centric parenting, right? Like parenting from the question of like, who is my child? Like continually, and creating the structures and all that. And so kind of switching off my soul-centric view for a moment, just kind of my other concerns about what's happening in this nation and in our environment. I don't think we have time. I don't think if we just focus on the youth, the youth will save us one day. I think, frequently I hear that offered as almost like, I'm not saying you're saying this, but I hear it often as a cop out, well, I just have to work my insurance job, but I'm really inspired by my niece, she's going to be the one. I'm like, yo, you have all the networks, all the capital, all the know-how. What are you waiting for? Like, do it now. She's not going to be alive. She's going to be breathing sulfur dioxide by the time she gets into her, her fullness as a soul. Like, she's going to be diminished. Like, she's not going to be able to breathe and eat. And she's not going to be safe. So I hate to say it. I mean, it's on all of us, but especially those with the networks, capital, and know-how. It's on us as leaders to do it right now, or she's not going to be alive. So,
I agree with that 100%. So thank you for pointing to that. It is definitely both and, because things are deteriorating across a broad spectrum of topics, from a nation basically born in and from a bloodbath that has continued to practice blood bathing for just under 250 years now, and doesn't really own that. And then that doesn't even touch the planet itself. So there's a lot that has to be addressed to give the young kids a shot at having some oxygen and access to some good things. So
Gentlemen, I'm going to take this moment to excuse myself. Please carry on the good conversation. I appreciate all of you and the good work you're all doing in the world. King, you in Baltimore City. Brandon, where are you again? San Diego, right?
San Diego, yeah.
Yeah, and Reg up in Connecticut. Thanks, gentlemen, for holding these fully human conversations and the good work you all do in the world.
Thanks, Ken.
Have a blessed and productive day.
See you, Ken.
Thank you. You as well. We'll see you soon.
Brendan, I think that we're talking from a perspective of purpose in the good sense, right? And I think that's a good thing, obviously. But I think that at the same time, I think that some people who have a negative agenda can identify with purpose and may say that their purpose may be to go out here and kill certain people in a mass shooting. That's what they believe their purpose is. So with that being said, how do you think that we really shift the consciousness of somebody to make sure that they align with a positive purpose and not just a purpose that may not necessarily be in the best interest of mankind?
Mm-hmm. That's a great, I mean, because ISIS has a purpose, right?
Right.
Hitler had a purpose.
Right.
Andrew Jackson had a purpose. I mean, there's so many purposes that had deleterious effects, right? And continue to, like, so, so in 2018, I wrote a book called Planet on Purpose, where I looked at kind of what actually is a leader, and it's essentially a definition that has ISIS and Hitler not occur as leaders, basically, that they have to be soul initiated, to use kind of Bill Plotkin's words. Like, they know their ecological niche, their mythopoetic identity. So that's the first one. Embodied. So as Reggie's done for decades now, like, embodied that mythopoetic identity and begin to deliver it in all these different ways. And all that exists to inhabit your niche. You have to understand the ecology within which it's situated, right? So you have to be intellectually, like, world wizened in a sense. You have to understand the systems that are at play within which you perform your purpose. And you could very easily argue that Hitler, ISIS, and Jackson had no clue the world in which they were inhabiting. They were like living in a dream, like a complete delusion. So they've not rooted in what's actually happening. And then the third is heart opened, which it's kind of hard to even connect with your purpose if you're not. But some folks, after they discover it, their heart closes, and they're not in an ongoing dialogue about their own heartbreak and their own shadows, the stuff that's in the way of them fulfilling their purpose. So, and that, in my judgment, can really only be held by others. So meaning, like, being in a transformative circle, like a men's circle, women's circle, all gendered circle of some sorts, a group of others who are holding you accountable to your purpose. So that's a tall order. I don't, probably Reggie has that. Probably Ken has that. Probably you have that. I believe I have some of that, but not that many folks who are using the word purpose have any of those things. They don't have a men's circle. They don't have an understanding of white supremacy and, ecological destruction. They don't have the support of other heart open leaders to keep them accountable to living their purpose. So it's very easy to say like, oh yeah, my purpose is now this, because the ego, the shadows will start to play. And that's really only where a council can hold you accountable. Because none of us are strong enough to do it by ourselves. I know my ego's shady. I'm sure all of your egos are shady too.
Absolutely.
It's so the question that remains a mystery for me, and I mean I know some of the answers to this. Some of the prospective answers is probably a safer way to say it. So what is it that draws someone to begin to ask bigger questions, to reflect on purpose or true, who am I really? Those type of questions. So we know that recovering from trauma and recovering from trauma can do it.
Yeah.
We know that grace, suddenly bring something just happened and we can't explain it, serendipity, and that can do it. And we also know that intentional practice can do it, but something, what leads someone to begin to intentionally practice? And so the question that arises is, I believe that everyone has a right to live his or her life as he or she chooses. And it would be really cool for all of us if everyone were living a more conscious, aware, purposeful, in the best meaning of that word, life. So how then do we navigate, the difference between the finger waggers? Well, you should be doing this, and that happens on the right and the left. I mean, so everybody's guilty of that.
Yeah.
As opposed to, so some of it is, so you be an exemplar. If you're, you allow, King, Gandhi, and others, and allow, just by their example. Okay, my life is my message, was what Gandhi said. But how close is any of us? And this is for you, King, and for you, Brandon. So what is it, even within the same family of origin, that somebody goes on and does their own work and just continues to evolve, and somebody else stays, I'll use the word, stuck in the cultural worldview and the cultural givens from their family of origin, and when they're 60 years old, they still see the same world in the same way. So can somebody please answer that? What makes the move happen?
I mean, King, you want to go, or I can share?
Well, I'll share, and I definitely want you to hear your perspective on it, Brandon. But I think that, that's a great question. I can speak about from my perspective, right? And I would say from my perspective, the shift happened with me was, as you say, it wasn't so much a traumatic experience as it was seeing disappointment in my parents and my mother in particular, because I wasn't achieving at the level that she had envisioned for me. And that was because I, at young, wayward youth, I felt that the best thing to do in high school was go get girls and party, right? And I didn't really see any benefit. Now, she had instilled in me the fundamental level of education, so I knew how to read. I understood that, but school to me just seemed like a waste of time, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't until I overheard her having a conversation, and I heard her disappointment explain to a friend of hers of how she disappointed, because the friend was obviously sharing with her how excited she was that her kids were doing so well. And I could see on my mom's face the disappointment that she couldn't share that same enthusiasm. And that to me was the shift, so to speak, or the tipping point, as Michael Gladwell talks about. So that got me more in line with, I got to get on ball. So then it was like, now how do I go about getting on ball? That asking those questions put me on a path to, I didn't understand it was a purpose at that time, but I knew it was something I was not in alignment with.
Yeah.
And just quickly, I see that same thing happening in Baltimore City. The work that I do, I see thousands of young men out on the street corners who have no purpose.
Yeah.
And because they have no purpose, and I think that's really the most dangerous thing that a young man can have is no purpose, right? Because they're the ones that I think that can be most influential, or that can be most indoctrinated into a different negative purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And that they can go off the rails, whether it's mass shootings or just simply robbing and mugging someone, on a small level, because you don't see the overall human connection and how that actions, those behaviors impact the greater society. And you don't care because you haven't tapped into that purpose. So for me, I really look at purpose really as, and using this analogy, that we understand everything is energy. To me, that once you align your purpose, that's the first time you really tune to that frequency of love that the Creator has given off. It's like you tune into that, and now you begin to communicate within that purpose alignment, and then everything to me begins to really make sense as far as who you are once you truly connect with that. But without that, you're just lost, and you're liable to just latch on to anything that just seems to make sense in that moment, because it's more of a reaction, a survival kind of behavior. We lost Brandon there, but hopefully we get Brandon back. But I think that if that answer makes any kind of
it does, and what I really appreciate in what you said. So my earliest experience was almost diametrically opposed to yours. Here he comes.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Right.
King, you're in the middle of something great, and I lost it. My apologies.
No problem. I wrapped up, so Reggie had beginning to.
I'll just say this really quickly because the question was directed at both of you. I want to hear yours, Brandon. But what King was saying about his, being, disappointing his mom, and seeing her face reflected in what some other parents were saying. So my experience as a youngster and even as an adolescent was very different. I was overly deferential to authority. If you were a year older than me, you were an authority figure. All the mothers and fathers in my neighborhood were aunt and uncle, and they all looked out for all of us. And I didn't hit the adolescent rebellion until I was well into my 20s and early 30s. So I was overly deferential, Italian American Catholic, New York, and just believed in all that. And for me, it was gradually seeing the flaws in the apparent authority figures from certain school administrators. Most teachers were actually pretty good. I was pretty blessed with good teachers, but I was just a really dedicated student and did what I was told. And I started to see some of the flaws in some of their arguments, everything from the Catholic Church to just authority in general. And so I began to push back and question it. So I didn't really rebel in adolescence, but then I became a monster in my late 20s and early 30s because it was just, I had, that time, that I guess the courage to push back, but I just accepted everything I was told. And I was a good student at doing it. So I got good grades, but it was because I was just saying yes, 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 yes to everything. So it took me well into my, again, late 20s, early 30s to say, okay, there might be something else going on here. So anyway, so I wanted to, it felt like a counterpoint to I wasn't chasing girls and partying in high school. So I'm jealous of your adolescence, Ken.
Don't be. It doesn't lead to a positive outcome relationship.
Yeah. Well, I can certainly relate to both because I, like you, Reggie, was dutiful scholar athlete, and then in my 20s was when I was just like, by the time I was 27, I'd been arrested in 6 different states. I was just like a madman with partying. But coming back to your question, obviously you've got the purpose crisis of something not working out well, or loss, grief. And Reggie, you spoke to it. Like you had someone who you deeply respected, in this case your mom, who knew that you're better than this, and to really get the loving mentorship in that disappointment. That's another really powerful thing. Unfortunately, most folks don't have those wizened elders who can reflect back like, that was beautiful, that lit my heart up, or that, I know that you're better than this, or I know that this is not really what you're here to do. But for the other folks who are, say, more mature now in positions of leadership, like how do they begin this journey? I think we're seeing it in real time right now. I lead this one CEO circle, and 2/3 of them are like, I'm out. Like, I know the world has changed. I know I want to be a part of it. What I have here is so toxic and beyond repair. I'm looking for the door. Like, and some of them who can sell, or find an exit are doing that. But there's other folks who are like afraid to do it because the recruiters aren't calling them anymore because they look like Reggie and I. Like they're like, yeah, the last thing we need is another toxic white dude to join senior leadership. So they're like in this place, like, I've got to pay for the colleges, and the wife wants this, and they're feeling it. And what they're speaking to is what Reggie mentioned earlier, is that everything about the old story is falling away. This belief that America's the best place ever being one of them, right? Belief in our democracy, that anybody, regardless of what they look like, where they came from, can achieve. We all know income mobility is at a 50-year low. And looking at just government itself, total gridlock, polarization, lots of great legislation, dead on arrival in the Senate. Like, only 25% of us believe or trust the government. That's down from like 77% in 1964. You can imagine who was in that 77% back then, and who was in the 23%. And then you look at the other institutions that we rely on for our social norms: religion, education, journalism. Those have also been on a multi-decade long slide. And on some level, every leader recognizes that the story they've been living into, the success narrative, like, if one of these days I'm going to achieve enough, make enough, that the board game, like, the board has changed. They realize I've been playing this wrong, the wrong game the whole time, and I got great at playing the wrong game. So bit by bit, 2/3 of this CEO group are like, I need to go to the tropics and just go away for a while because who I am right now can't fulfill on anything worthwhile in our economy. Like, we just can't do it. Like, I'm not heart opened. I'm not purpose awakened. I'm not world wizened. I'm not embodied. I'm not the one right now. So, conscious leaders who are conscious of that actually go do the work. They'll go work with coaches, go do a vision quest, go do a medicine ceremony, but most of them aren't. And they're just kind of just trying to keep reality at bay for a little bit until they retire, or until, they figure something else out. And I would say, especially for men, because we've been given this incredible position of privilege, we tend to think of problems as hardware fixes. All right, just need a new wife, new apartment, new car, new this, new job, new role, new company, new city. Like, all right, this coffee cup doesn't work anymore. I need a new coffee cup. And that's because we've been conditioned that we're fine and whole and perfect on the inside. Golden children, the favorite son, all that kind of stuff. Whereas folks who aren't in that, women, people of color, people who don't identify as straight or gender binary, they've been looking at the world as though they don't belong since go. And so they're much more open to software fixes, to put it in very mechanistic terms. But really what we're talking about is much more open to, like, who am I in the face of this soulless society that keeps dehumanizing me? So that's why, 2/3 of folks in therapy are women. That's why, the folks who are actually doing the inner work aren't from positions of privilege generally. So what the opportunity is for those who do have the privilege, the power, the networks, the capital, is to begin to do the inner work. And then they can lead from an embodied place and make greater flourishing, generativity, human potential activation possible. But that, like I said, that's a $1 million question. How do we get this over the fence? And to an extent, my most recent book, Purpose Work Nation, is that attempt, like written for that kind of center left CEO, as like a tough love letter. Like it's all messed up. Good news, bad news. Nobody's coming. Is the bad news. Help is not coming from DC, the church, schools, journalism. The private sector is really the last semi-functional part of this mess. So that's kind of the first point of the book, is like what continues to or what is good in the world and what is bad in the world is now 100% your responsibility, because help isn't coming. So it's kind of to evoke this sense of like, oh, well, mission, legacy, like I need to figure out how to move forward. I won't drone on about the rest of the book, but that's the first point, is like really trying to like shift that decision maker into some new awareness.
No, I want to thank Ryan McShane for joining us, and he shared this compliment to you, Brandon. Heart open, purpose driven, and world awakened. Love that phraseology, Brandon. So thank you for joining us, Ryan. Appreciate your comments and being engaged with us. You know, Brandon, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about as we get near the top of the hour is that in writing this book, and you said you wrote it for the center left CEO, did you have that kind of avatar in mind when you throughout writing this book, or when you started off writing the book, did you say, this is exactly who I'm writing this book for? So the messages, the content is really, I'm speaking directly to this individual.
Yeah. I, like many authors, made the mistake of writing my first book for myself. So it's just like this soulful vomit, like, blah, here's who I am. Here's what needs to happen. Here's the world. And like, here's what you do about it. And, you know, realizing I didn't amount to a hill of beans other than like help me organize my thoughts. But yeah. And like, so what happened in 2020 was a bunch of folks got off the fence. A bunch of leaders like started reading How to Be an Anti-Racist, White Fragility, taking steps towards fulfilling our purpose as a nation by, you know, like defunding the politicians who are denying the election, making huge commitments towards racial justice. But then they got stuck because the white supremacists, which there are a considerable amount, I think the University of Chicago study said like 10 million Americans identify with white nationalism. You know, made a fuss. And then all this retrenchment back from support for what needs to happen. And so a lot of these CEOs are like, all right, what do I do now? We know that the last 20 years of DEI has had neutral to negative impact. I know that my investors, my board needs quarterly earnings, you know, and yeah, it's like either I deny responsibility or I take action and know I'm going to fail. And so what the book is written towards is like, well, first of all, you know, accept that you now have total responsibility for the human condition. And the second is like, if you care about living in a democratic society, we need new symbols. We need a new mythology as a nation. It can't just be about trying to hold on to this tiny little, you know, American exceptionalism narrative, this capitalism uber alles narrative. We need a bigger narrative. And so I look at the implied ethics of the bison, our national mammal, versus those of the eagle. The eagle is solitary, comes down, steal, exploit, scavenge, retreat, avoid all consequences for its actions, whereas the bison's herd, like us, mammals, takes care of the old, young, sick, leaves a place better than it found it, courageous, like runs into a storm versus away like cattle. So the second piece is like to evoke like a deeper sense of authentic patriotism, not denial for our genocides and our slavery and trafficking and rape and torture and all that. And the last piece is we now have all of these tools available to effectuate culture change at scale. And so the last 3-4 years, I've been working with a lot of companies in this space, and obviously started my own in 2020, just like Reggie, to move these best practices into action. So yeah, I wrote it thinking about them. Like, what do they need? Okay, they need to first take responsibility. Second, see that there's a path forward. And third, like realize there's actual tools they can use right now to save the republic, for lack of a better word.
Excellent. One of the things we're doing before we end the show, again, the theme of the show, the title of the show is Fully Human Connections. Right. And one of the tasks that we came up with, and we're going to ask you to participate with this, Brandon, is we are going to identify each week a person who we feel exemplifies a fully human connection. And because, again, that's a message we really want to get out there, is that at the end of the day, it's not really about all these societal trials that we've been trying to force us into. It's really about becoming fully human, and that journey of what that really entails and what that really means. And then connecting with yourself, and then making connections to others along that path. And so I'll go ahead and start to kind of set the context, but I would say my person I want to offer as a fully human connection this week is, he's past, and it could be a past or a present person. It's Marlon Brando. Of course, we love the actor Marlon Brando, but when I really began to research Marlon Brando, and I saw that, he was involved with the Black Panthers, and he financially supported them.
That's right. Yeah.
And put that on the line. And then his turn down of his Oscar performance, his award for The Godfather, because of what he wanted to stand with Native Americans around that. Just that kind of bold leadership. And that to me is an example of someone being fully human, understanding, because who turns down an Oscar, right? And for the most iconic role that most people associate with him today is that role as a Godfather. So I just say that I close with this, that it's a book I'm reading called Spiritual Capitalism. And I know you've heard this in other terms, but this time when I read it, it jumped out at me. It said, leadership is a sacred responsibility. And I think once you really begin to understand it in that context, you see things differently. So it's not just intellectually understanding, but when you really begin to say, how can I apply it as a sacred responsibility? So that's my example of someone who's fully human.
Beautiful, King.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brandon. Why don't you jump in, because I know you have to.
Yeah, I'm going to facilitate another client thing in like 6 minutes. Yeah, I think for that, like following that example, King, I think about Johnny Cash, very similar. Continue to let the world break his heart and give voice to it and bring it to an audience that, historically not used to those sorts of things in country, rock. His stand for people of color, for Native rights. And just towards the end of his life, just the vulnerability of aging, his last year of his life, owned all his disappointments, all his heartbreaks, all his failures. I'll end with that.
Yeah. And I'll just jump in really quickly. So Barbara Lee comes to mind, Congresswoman from out in Berkeley, Oakland. I didn't know who she was in 2001. I started seeing signs around New York, where I was living at the time, to impeach Barbara Lee. And I said, who is she and why are we going to impeach her? And, because she was wasn't my congresswoman, but she was the only person to vote no in Congress on the authority to give George W. Bush the authority to do whatever he needed to do to fight terrorism the only no vote on that legislation. And she was interviewed last year when we finally got out of Iraq and kind of out of Iraq and out of Afghanistan. And she said, I almost wished I had been wrong back then, because how it is now is so horrible. But she, in terms of a single voice standing up against great odds, so she's just one that I've always had a lot of respect for, and she still represents that district today. So, yeah.
Well, thank you, fellas. I do need to hop off, but it's been a pleasure to connect with y'all, and I'm sure Reggie will talk more to figure out how to cause some good trouble.
I hope so. Yeah. Good to meet you, John.
Real quick before you go, just get a title of your book, because we're going to wrap up now. Just want to.
Oh yeah, so it's called Purpose Work Nation, and you can learn about it at purposework.us.
Thank you, Brandon.
All right, take care.
Thanks, Reggie.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone. This has been another episode of Fully Human Connections.
Thank you both. I'll see you.
Bye.